Longtime friend, Fernando Angelucci, the storage stud at the storage stud on Instagram, thestoragestud.com. Literally I was just so happy just to even see him on Zoom here and catch up for a couple minutes because he's an amazing guy, fun guy, loves to help people out. If you remember him from one of the fourth podcast interview I've ever done in my career 3 years ago, close to 3 years ago, gave out his cell phone number, which I was surprised to hear. I've heard on some other podcasts, just kind of like catching up on him recently too. He does the same thing. We'll see if we get it out of him today, but we got tons of resources. He's going to give an awesome presentation. And as I've said, just an awesome human being, one of my favorite people, Fernando Angelucci. Nando, what is going on, my man?
What's up, Los? Appreciate you having me on again. That was a great introduction, by the way. I appreciate it.
a genuine pleasure and a privilege, man. I just let it roll. It's easy talking to you, man. I could just let it roll, and it's going to be a great podcast episode. So let's play a little bit of catch up, or kind of a state of the union of Fernando Angelucci. And by the virtual background, if you guys are watching on YouTube or his Instagram handle, website, or how I introduced him, the Storage Stud, you guys may be able to make an assumption of what he's focusing on these days. But do you guys want to give a state of the union across, real estate investing, what you have going on 2021 here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we had the self-storage or the wholesale business rolling, started to grow it out, hired a COO, brought him in as an owner on the company. He's been absolutely fantastic. His name's Jason. He's been crushing it. And then because of that, we got all of our processes in place. We are running everything on our EOS system through Traction, hired, new acquisition guys, hired a bunch of virtual staff as well. So it's been cruising recently. So that has opened up our time to go look at some passive income, take those wholesale dollars and put them into something that produce income for me while I sleep. And so what we started looking at was, okay, we have residential rentals, we have some multifamily rentals. There's pros and cons to both of those. I live in Chicago, so we have some pretty tough tenant landlord laws when it comes to being a landlord out here. It's nothing like San Francisco, but I mean, it's still starting to get pretty bad. So I was looking for a different avenue that was going to be less headache, less management, higher return, less risk. And then that's when I actually came across self-storage. And so what I'd like to kind of share with you and share with everybody listening and watching today is the top 9 reasons I decided to start investing in self-storage as my passive income vehicle, as opposed to single family and multifamily rentals. Because I know that's typically the first avenue you go to after you get your wholesaling business on lock, and you start buying single family rentals, and then maybe 1 or 2 to 4 flat units. And then all of a sudden you start buying 6 and 12 unit buildings. And there's an easier way to skip to the big boy leagues, while also having some really good leverage, some really good cash flow, and then less risk overall.
Love it, man. Yeah, let's go ahead and hop in there. As a quick background on Fernando too, I'll make sure to link his original episode if you kind of want to see his growth from a few years ago. But I remember your bioengineering background, right? Graduated bioengineering, ag bioengineering, got like a corporate job, but it wasn't very long. Got into real estate, kind of somewhat typical rich dad, poor dad. I mean, I read that book as well, through Dan, getting introduced through Dan. Started getting into the rental game a little bit, and that probably transitions now where you have that experience of single family, multifamily rentals, and have 9 reasons why self-storage is better.
Right, exactly.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it.
Okay, let's do this.
And if you guys are listening, make sure to check this out on YouTube if you actually want to see the presentation.
I'll go through most of it verbally as well. So, but if you'd like to see the presentation slides we're using as well, feel free.
Sweet.
So can you see everything here, Lo?
Yeah, storage stud, yeah.
There it is. All right, so just to start off here, I'm going to go ahead and give some contact information because you promised at the beginning of the episode. So there's my email address. My direct email address is info@titanwealthgroup.com. That comes straight to me. I do have some virtual assistants some executive assistants that monitor that inbox, but if there's anything that they can't handle, they'll push it off to me. So anything you guys need, feel free to reach out.
Sweet.
All right, so here's what we're talking about today. Why self-storage? Why self-storage over any other type of passive income real estate asset? And there's 9 reasons why. There's a ton of reasons, but I broke it down to about 9 that I think capture the idea the best. So the first here is we're going to go over, it has the highest returns of anything else I've looked at. Number 2, it's recession resilience. That's pretty topical now with the whole pandemic going on. Our properties have been operating absolutely fantastically during this time. You're offered great leverage, really, really good leverage, and I'll cover that in a little bit. Much easier management than single family and multifamily. It's a pretty fragmented market, and I'll go into what that means here shortly. Very low break-even occupancy. Very easy evictions, and I put evictions in quotes, and I'm using air quotes here for anybody seeing the video, because we actually don't do evictions. It's a whole different process of law for us to get people out of our units, and we'll go over that. Number 8 is it has a really high sticky factor. And then 9 is that there's multiple profit centers. There's not just rent. You can produce multiple streams of income just from one asset class. All right, so let's get started with highest return versus any other asset class. So if you look at like a 23, 24 year period, we're going to look at the average annual return of different investments. So you can see here at the very bottom of the chart, you have the S&P 500. If you invested in 1994, by 2017, your average annual return would have been about 7.5%. You go up a little bit higher, and then you can see multifamily and residential sitting at about 13.3 to 13.4%. So really good return. And then at the top, though, you see self-storage at 17.4%. So a whole 4% larger of an average annual return. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start looking at, okay, what is the difference between that 13.3 and that 17.4? What does that 4% compounding mean for you? Let's just put it into real dollars, right? So let's say in 1994, you had $100,000 to invest and you had to pick one avenue. And then let's look at what that would have turned into by 2017 using those metrics from that previous table that was provided by NAREIT, which is the National Association of REITs. They do a lot of studies on real estate investment trusts and how they return. So as you can see, you use that $100,000 into the S&P 500. Within 24 years, that turned into about $500,000. So not too bad. With that same 100,000, if you put it into apartments or residential, that 100,000 would have turned into about 1.7 to 1.8 million bucks. Now let's look at where that 4% compounding changes, right? If you put that same 100,000 in self-storage in 1994, by 2017, that would have been worth over $4 million. So over double the return from your apartments or your residential because of that 4% compounding per year. So huge difference.
Massive.
Usually with people, they're saying, okay, if it's got high return, that must mean that it has super high risk too. But then when you look at the data, that is actually not the case. So the second point I want to talk about is the recession resilience. The pandemic's not over yet. So I'm going to use the 2007 to 2009 mortgage crisis. And we're going to look at the values lost across all the REITs surveyed. And these are REITs, right? These are professional organizations. I'm not talking about the mom and pop. The mom and pop lost even more than this. Mm-hmm. So when you look at this, obviously the S&P 500, they lost 22% in those 2 years. Mortgages lost 19.5. But if you look at multifamily at the professional level, they still lost 6.7 to 6.4% of their holdings. Or of their value on their holdings. Now, I know a lot of investors that during that time, they lost way more than this, right? 20, 30, 40%. They lost their entire businesses. If you look at self-storage here, there's only a 3.8% drop across all the REITs surveyed. And when I talk to a lot of the mom and pop owners, they actually experienced an increase in valuation. So the REITs are just slow to react. They're big moving machines. So why is that? Why during a massive recession, some called it a depression, that, you saw such a lower disparity in value change from self-storage to, say, multifamily or residential? So one of the questions I always ask people is, how many people watching or listening to this have kids. If you have kids and you were forced to downsize, what would you keep and what would you throw away? Would you throw away those drawings that your kids made for you? I know my father, I'm almost 30 years old. My dad still has this giant like Tupperware container full of just like all these like crappy little drawings I made him. They don't really mean anything to me, but to him it's sentimental value and he'll never throw those away, right? And a lot of people that have kids listening to this or watching this, they know what I'm talking about. That sentimental value, they would never give that up, even if they didn't have the room for it. So what do those people do? They ended up putting them into storage facilities, right? Self-storage is great because we follow the two largest generations. The first being the baby boomers. They're all retiring and downsizing from these huge houses from the suburbs into smaller condos or into assisted or active living communities, and they're putting their stuff somewhere. The second one is the millennial groups. They don't want to buy these huge houses and live in the suburbs. They rather live downtown in the city, right next to the action where all the bars and restaurants are. And they're willing to live in a 700 to 1,000 square foot apartment as opposed to living in a 3,500 square foot house in the burbs, and then just get a self-storage facility as like a second closet for them. And they just put their winter clothes or summer clothes or their outdoor gear, whatever it is, stuff that they don't need right now, that they only use seasonally. So it's almost like a second closet. The third thing that I really liked about storage after going through the data was it had some of the best leverage available to not only starting off investors, but also seasoned investors. And when I dug farther, the reason for that was when I was looking at bank data, it had the lowest default rate of any asset class that the banks were lending on. So we looked at 2011, 2018, that's what we saw. But then also when you looked at each default individually, it was always also the lowest average loss per default when there was a default on any type of asset in those banks' books. So because of that, these banks are now fighting over each other to give us leverage. And especially now when a lot of their portfolio was sitting in, C and B class multifamily, office buildings, retail, all the stuff that banks thought were safe now are just burning up their books, and they need to balance out that risk. So they're looking for these self-storage loans. And I'll talk about some loans that I've gotten in the past as some examples. So let's look at those specifically, 2011 to 2018, looking at default rates. When you look at, let's say, the Intech Solution data or the Wells Fargo Securities data, so these are major data providers from huge companies that carry a lot of balance sheet. When you look at self-storage, the default rates were so low. I mean, to the point where they're like 24 to 40 times lower than multifamily, right? You could see self-storage 0.04% default rate, multifamily 1.83% default rate. So huge factors of magnitude difference. So that's why banks love it and are willing to give us these really great loans. Second thing is when you look at, again, the average loss per default. Let's look at 1998 to 2017. So that encompasses 2 to 3 recessions in that period. When you look at disposed and outstanding, you see that on average, banks would lose about 3.3 to 4.8% of the value of their holding on that non-performing asset. Multifamily was also within that range, 3.4 to 4.4. When you look at self-storage, it was 0.86 to 1.52. So 4 to 6 times lower than multifamily and residential. So here's a case study. Hampton Storehall, it's a facility that I bought in Tennessee. Typical value add deal, needed all the doors replaced, a lot of springs replaced. We had to do a lot of driveway stuff, get a lot of bad tenants out. So they gave us a 5-year balloon on a 20-year amortized loan. This is a bank, basically bridge loan, 5.25 interest with 1 point. The first year was interest only payments. Well, here's the part that was really great. It was a 0% down loan. We didn't have to bring any money to the closing table. I bought it for $725,000, and at closing it appraised for $1.2 million. So right there, $500,000 gain in equity, right? Now that's a bridge loan. Now recently, since I bought that, I'm rolling this facility up into a portfolio, and getting a loan from one of the big boys that work in the commercial mortgage-backed securities market. And they're giving me a 10-year fixed rate on a 30-year AM schedule at 4% interest with $1 million cash out to me. And that's over 2 years of building up this portfolio. Not a bad return, right? The fourth point I really like is because there's less people to deal with, there's also less management. So, whose passive income is truly passive, and I'm using quotes around the word passive because I've talked to so many landlords, especially on the single family side, that they call it passive income, but they work 60 hours a week, messing with tenants, even the ones that have property management companies. They're still working 10, 20 hours on their portfolio. That doesn't seem very passive to me. I would consider that active, right? So I always ask people, show of hands, how many hours a week are you managing your passive income? And on average, I get people telling me between 20 to 60 hours, which is not passive at all. Here's an example on one deal that we did in Yorkville, Illinois. Managed it 4 hours per month. That was about $8,000 in NOI per month. That means that my time was worth about $2,000 an hour. That's how much I was making by managing this facility, right? Many of these smaller facilities are unmanned and you can actually automate them. That's what we've done with a lot of them. So very easy to get into them. And then once you set it up, it's almost like an armchair investment. The next thing, which I thought was super crazy in the self-storage world, was that it's a fragmented market. And what I mean by that is, in 2017, there was roughly 52,000 self-storage facilities. Now the estimate's closer to 65 to 70,000. So not a lot, but that's still a lot of facilities to look at. But when you look at the industry ownership, only 18% of those facilities are owned by the six largest REITs. Another 9% are owned by the next 100 largest operators, which I'm about to jump into this category, right? Just to show you the scale. That means that 73% of the facilities out there are owned by mom and pop operators. They're usually operating it as a second business, more of a hobby. There's a lot of value add to be done, and they don't really know the value of the asset they have on them. I'm able to walk into these deals at really good cap rates. The lowest cap rate I bought a facility at was 7%, and the highest I bought one at was 12.7%. And that was day one. That's not pro forma. That's me walking into cash flow, and then usually over a period of 18 months, we value add another 2 to 3% above that on the cap rate. So really great opportunity. This is the part that I think a lot of people really love is point number 6 for me, which is no tenants, no toilets, no trash. I don't have to deal with people calling me at 1 o'clock. I don't have to deal with people calling my property manager at 1 o'clock and then them trying to get a hold of me because something's on fire or something's leaking in a frozen environment, which is going to cause pipes to burst, whatever it is, right? So because of this, there's very low break-even occupancy. For us, when we buy deals cash, the low to mid 30% occupancy, we're already covering all of our expenses. If we leverage it and we put some bank loans or some higher level loans on them, then you're looking at about mid 60s to high 60s% occupancy for leveraged assets. Bring me a multifamily guy that tells me that he is still profitable at 65 to 70% occupancy. It won't happen. Especially with single family. I mean, with a single family facility, or a single family house, if one tenant moves out, you go from 100% occupancy to 0% occupancy. You have a lot more risk. The second thing about the no toilets, tenants, and trash is lower overhead. Very minimal utilities, right? I may have plumbing for an office bathroom. That's about it. I may have very rudimentary HVAC to keep the climate control units at the right temperatures. I don't have to heat these things or cool these things for it to be comfortable for a human. I usually have to keep it at about 60 degrees in the winter and about 80 degrees in the summer. So very minimal use of power and utilities on those units. One of the biggest things is the turnovers, right? There's no carpet cleaning, there's no painting, there's no leaky faucets, there's no fixing the furnace or changing out the AC condenser. That in and of itself is one of my biggest issues that I had with our multifamily portfolio was every time somebody moved out, if they caused damage, I'd have to go fix it. I would have to go re-rent it. And by the time I got someone back in there, I was out 3 months of rent and maybe another 1 to 2 months worth of rent in, cost to repair and turn the unit. And I lost all my profitability for the year, or maybe 2 years because of that, right? No winter HVAC failures and no hot water heater failures. I don't have to worry about this stuff. This is one of the hardest things to deal with when you're in colder climates like you and I, right? If something happens like this is an immediate emergency and you have to handle it immediately, or the city can come down on you and fine you. So we don't have to deal with that. Less headaches. So here's a case study of the very first deal that I bought. It's in Yorkville, Illinois. It's about an hour and a half outside of Chicago, in what I would call an exurb. So maybe between a suburb and between rural. So kind of a mix. So super rudimentary, right? 3 buildings, no fencing, nothing special, no utilities. And this deal had a break-even purchase at 35% occupancy, unleveraged. One second here.
You're good.
All right, maybe we can edit that out, Los.
Yeah, I'll edit that out.
Okay, so let's take it from the top. So this is a case study of my very first facility that I purchased. It's in Yorkville, Illinois, in the middle of an exurb, which is between like rural and suburb areas starting to get developed. Super simplistic, right? No fence, no electricity, it's just roll up doors, no climate control, nothing. When we bought this, the break-even occupancy was at 35%. If we would have put leverage on it, it would have been at about 81% because there's still a lot of value add to doing it. Once we stabilized it, the break-even occupancy unleveraged was 28%. All I needed was 28% of my units filled for me to cover my monthly nut. Once I put debt on it, I only needed 64% of my occupancy to be able to cover not only the expenses, but also the debt service. So like way less risk than say a multifamily or a single family portfolio. This is one of the things that for me in Chicago and for those listening out there that are in very tenant friendly states is a huge deal. And that's point number 7, which is easy evictions. And again, I'm using quotes around the word evictions because we actually don't do that. So the biggest thing is with self-storage, we are not guided by landlord tenant law or rental law. What we are covered by is what's called lien law or property law. So when somebody puts their stuff into one of my units, they're automatically allowing me to place a lien on their goods. And if they do not pay their rent, then I can lock them out of their unit. They do not get access to their unit until they bring the late payment current, right? If they still, after me giving notice that they still don't want to make the payment or try to avoid my calls, then I schedule an auction. And it's just like the show Storage Wars. Basically what happens is I put out 2 notices into a local circulation newspaper. And within 30 to 45 days, if you don't pay me, then the auction takes place. And then I sell all the goods in that unit to the highest bidder. And that usually covers all my lost rent. That also usually covers a bunch of fees that we can charge, like a lien fee and an overlock fee and the tenant clean out fee. So we actually can turn a profit by doing this. And the best part about that is the turn, turning this unit, it's done within 15 seconds, right? The buyer comes, picks up this stuff, and then usually they're there meeting a new customer to let them in. So all they got to do is broom sweep it. Because there's not a lot of damage you can cause. It's concrete floors and corrugated steel walls and roof. The only way you can really do damage to that is if you have some serious power tools. So that turn, within 30 to 45 days from the date of delinquency, from the 5-day notice of late payment, I already have a new tenant in there paying me rent and covering all the lost rent that I received on the last 30 days. So unlike multifamily that, again, you may lose 3 to 5 months worth of rent by turning it and marketing it and paying a realtor to fill it. You avoid all of this. You can compress your time to cash flow, which I really love. Now we got 2 more here, so stick with me.
No, this is great stuff.
Okay, so I hope I'm not going too
stuff.
fast, but point number 8 is that it has a super high sticky factor. So what do I mean by high sticky factor? So if I increase the rent on a unit, $20 on a $150 unit, usually most of the tenants, they look at that and they say, hey, it's not really worth my time to go spend 2 days getting a moving truck, paying $500 plus spending 48 hours of my time to move all this stuff to another facility that is maybe $5 or $10 cheaper per month. It just doesn't make sense. The payback period would mean that they need another 10 months or so for that to make sense. But when you look at that, a $20 increase on a $150 unit, that's a 13% increase to the bottom line, right? That's huge. So let's look at that from a residential or a multifamily standpoint. If I were to increase rent on, say, a $1,500 unit by 13%, that means that I'm increasing, in 1 year, I'm increasing my rent from $195, or I'm increasing it $195 on that $1,500 apartment. You can be pretty sure that most tenants, when they see that type of rent increase notice, that they're moving out and they're not going to stay. So that's what I mean by very high sticky factor. And then the last thing, which is really cool, is, when you talk about, billionaires, they start talking about, it's not about how much money you make from one avenue. It's about how much money do you make from multiple streams of income, right? And this can be done within one asset class with self-storage. So in addition to the rents and the late payments that I can charge, I can also offer to store cars on additional land I have, or RVs, or boats. I can sell locks. I can sell renter's insurance and moving supplies, packaging material, right? I'm sure anybody that's listening to this has ever been inside a self-storage facility has noticed that they have all these upsells that you can buy, right? I've seen that facilities that have FedEx offices in them that offered printing services for, large scale printing and signs and banners. Scanning, cell phone towers is a great one. If you get a facility that's in somewhat of a dead spot, you can contact the carriers and see if they're willing to rent space on a cell phone tower if you were to build it. And you can get some really good income off of that, and it's zero maintenance. Billboard advertisements we've seen. Wine storage, truck rentals, so like U-Haul trucks that you can run from a self-storage facility on its own. Don't even have to go to a U-Haul. They're usually dropped off for you, and then your customers can go ahead and use it and rent those things. Private mailboxes, and so much more. So like there's all these little things. We've looked at putting fingerprint machines for like federal requirements for jobs and things of that nature. That was going to pay us really good income. There's just a bunch of different things that you can do to just increase the amount of profit centers on one of these self-storage facilities. So in summary, the 9 reasons why I like self-storage over single family and multifamily is: 1, it's got the highest return. 2, it's recession resilient or recession tolerant. 3, you're offered great leverage by banks because they really know how safe these loans are on their books. 4, there's easier management. 5, it's a fragmented market, which means a lot of opportunity for new investors. 6, very low break-even occupancy. 7, easy evictions, with air quotes. Again, we actually do auctions. 8, it has a very high sticky factor. Tenants usually won't move when you raise rents on them. And then 9, you have all these different ancillary profit centers that you can throw on top of them. So I hope I didn't go through that too fast. I was wondering if you had any questions for me, Los.
Not at all. I mean, that's a very concise, as someone that's not super knowledgeable on self-storage stuff. That was very concise and a cool presentation there. Do we want to talk a little bit? I know you did the case study for that one deal, but do we want to kind of dive into maybe just an overarching discussion on your self-storage business, like how you're coming across deals, things like that? I mean, I would have a ton of questions unpacked from the 9 reasons there, but in short, I mean, reason number 1, you're getting the best return. I don't know what it's like marketing to these homeowners. I'm sure that, like, not a con, but maybe just a difference. I'm sure that the due diligence period and underwriting the deals, like, I'm not a numbers guy at all. I'm a words and a people guy, but I'm sure that the underwriting process is going to be more tedious, or there's going to be more time to do due diligence and overwrite self-storage properties. I know that you have self-storage units in different states, so I don't know if that includes, I'm sure that you may have boots on the ground in some of those to check those out in person, but I don't know if you're flying out there. So I would have a lot of questions that we can kind of just go through your operation and what it looks like, maybe just soup to nuts here. And I'm sure we could have some
Yeah.
good conversation, because I'm probably somewhat of a mindset of people listening to this that don't really know a ton about self-storage, except, you know, your dad had one where you put your old soccer and basketball trophies growing up, and probably an ideal client that it just like has it. They may not even know how much the month they pay for it and just holds on to it a while. I can see definitely both verticals, especially in COVID, if people are either downsizing to a smaller place and they want to throw some stuff in storage, or maybe even people that are going into a bigger property, they may even want to keep a self storage for other stuff. So let's talk about your, you know, your business, maybe some other case studies, kind of wrap that all in together.
Yeah. And what I'm willing to do for you guys is, Lois, if you got some time another day, I can do an entire presentation on how I underwrite these things. So I can teach
Sure.
your listeners and viewers exactly how I run through these deals. But
For
let's
sure.
talk about some of the points that you touched on. So marketing, first of all. So believe it or not, all I did was I just switched my wholesale marketing engine from residential homeowners to self-storage facilities. And I've been crushing it in the industry. When I tell other self-storage investors, like the returns that the response rates I'm getting on our marketing campaigns, they're blown away. And I realize it's because they never had to really run a real estate marketing company, which is what a wholesale business is. You're not a real estate company, you're a marketing company on both sides. So literally just that was the one tweak. Continue to use all the CRMs, continue to use everything the same. The letter was even basically the same. The only difference was how you got the list. So instead of, you know, going to list source, I just contacted basically a data engineer. I can give if your listeners, you know, give me a shout out or shoot me an email, I can connect them with my guy. And yes, it was a little bit more expensive, but in the end of the day, it was totally worth it. So instead of me paying 8 cents a lead, I was paying about 30 to 35 cents a lead. And I was using what are called NAICS codes, NAICS codes. So that is a classification code on how income is generated on businesses and on certain land. And you can use that to target these owners. And I just sent them a letter. That's how I started out. And then over time, I started incorporating the other types of marketing in there: text message campaigns, email campaigns, ringless voicemail drops, cold calling. And it was totally worth it. So, and on the back end, I'll tell you why. So I first started off not buying these self-storage facilities, but I started off wholesaling them. So here's a perfect example. In my market in Chicago, our average wholesale fee is anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000. That's a lot higher than most in the country. I'd say average wholesale fee in the country is going to be anywhere between $8,000 to $15,000 per property. We closed a self-storage deal maybe 6 to 8 months ago, wholesale deal where we put it under contract at $800,000, and then we wholesaled it to a 1031 buyer at $1,032,000 and walked away with a $232,000 wholesale fee. And that was all done within like a 60-day period of time. So unlike a traditional residential wholesale that might take 30 days from start to finish, this was twice as long, but I made 10 times the fee, right? So totally worth it. And I'll teach people how to do that due diligence in another video that we do together. The second thing that you touched on, other than the due diligence, was, you know, different states. So my first facility, which was Yorkville, that was about an hour and a half drive away from me. And I was able to go there when I needed, but I specifically ran it as if I had to jump on a plane to get to it, because I wanted to see, can I do this outside my backyard? You know, Illinois is a very high property tax state. Self-storage, your two largest expenses are property taxes and labor, right? So you want to get those two things down as much as possible. So after running that facility for 6, 7 months, maybe 8 months, then we started looking at facilities outside our backyard. And within a 1-year period, we bought another 8 facilities. And they have all been running real great because of the systems that we put in place. And again, self-storage is very easy to manage. It's a lot less people to deal with, a lot less issues that can occur. So you can build a system very easily to manage things that are not nearby. Or If you don't want to do that yourself, you can hire a third-party manager, just like in residential and multifamily rentals. They charge a fee of gross rents, and they do everything for you. So those are two parts that we really liked about it, especially when we first started. And then you start building momentum very quick. So in order to subsidize our buying of these facilities, that's why we continued to wholesale them, because now we're able to spend a lot on the marketing campaign. When I first started, our first campaign was to about 7,000 owners. And I believe it cost us in total around 6,000, maybe $7,000 to do the whole thing. And out of that campaign, we got like 4 or 5 deals, right? Nowadays, they're spending closer to like 75,000, but that's because we're not only buying 5 to 10 deals a year ourselves, but we're also wholesaling a couple deals a quarter to other investors that are trying to get started. So for us, now that we're kind of leveling up to the next level with storage, we no longer will buy anything that's less than 30,000 net rentable square feet. That's typically you're going to be in $1 million plus range, maybe $2 million, depending on where you're at in the country. But I've wholesaled deals to investors that were $100,000 at a 10 cap, right? That's what a rental property costs. Mm-hmm. So you can get into a self-storage deal at the same price as a rental property, be more profitable, have a better loan on it, and have less headache in management.
Amazing, dude. Yeah, with the wholesaling, I mean, I'm just kind of it's probably more similar to single family than I'm realizing, especially with the marketing. Now the direct mail has been your bread and butter over your career. Sounds like you're doing the same thing, a little bit of a longer period to actually close, but you're making more money per hour, like you said. And with the example you gave, where you're making a little over $2,000 per hour on that one example on the slide there. So when you're propositioning these for wholesaling these, are you essentially you're looking to buy it at a potentially like a certain cap rate and then assign it at a certain cap rate?
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially.
So with storage, we're always looking for value add deals, just like in residential wholesaling, right? You're not gonna try to wholesale a deal that is, there's nothing that needs to be done. It's move-in ready, because there's most likely they're going to use a realtor for that. So same thing with self-storage. You're going to find deals that are value add. And then once you get them, then it's just like in single family, you build a rapport, you get their numbers. So instead of finding out like what the rent is and what their taxes are for a residential rental, you say, okay, what are all the rents that you get? What are all the expenses that you get? And then you can calculate the net operating income, income minus expenses, and then you divide that by the purchase price, and that tells you the cap rate. So what we do is, instead of using like a regular formula like you would, ARV times 70% minus repairs minus wholesale fee, we kind of do the same thing, but on a cap rate basis. So I say, okay, in this market, value add deals that are listed by the big brokerage firms, they're selling at a 5 to 7% cap rate. Okay, great. So that means that we need to be getting deals at 7 to 9%. So usually 2 percentage points above, right? And that's what we want to be selling them to other investors at, because then it's a good deal. They're going to buy it from us. They don't care that there's a wholesale fee. And then just making sure that you build in enough spread for yourself. So if everything in that market, it's a high cost market, it's selling for 5 caps, and you're able to get somebody a value add deal that's a 7 cap day one, with a chance to value add up to double digits, maybe 10 or 11% once it's stabilized, you can easily pull, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 rip. I think our average assignment fee on the self-storage business is like $65,000 a piece.
Yeah.
So, not a lot of those big, $230K assignment fees, but they're still a lot bigger than single family with very little risk. And then the best part is the buyers are easier to work with. Typically the buyers of self-storage are well capitalized. The banks they're working with are commercial banks, so they don't care if there's an assignment fee. They'll finance that. There's no issues. Commercial property assignments are very typical. That's a very normal thing. Whereas I've had deals on the residential side that blew up just because the seller's attorney didn't like that there was an assignment, even though they didn't even know what it was, right? So a lot less headache on all sides.
You're making a very convincing argument here. You got me sold for sure. And that makes sense as far as, kind of arbitraging these deals off, what makes sense for the person that you're assigning it out to. When you're getting that information, I'm kind of just thinking out loud here, where you're asking about, you're kind of same thing with building rapport with a single family seller, but you're kind of getting some deeper information. It's a bigger asset to these mom and pop operators that have a place. So maybe that's kind of like a stage 2, stage 3 conversation after some finesse rapport building, where you start asking some of the numbers that you went through, like occupancy rate and stuff like that when you're going through.
Right. Gross rents, expenses. And then one of the things that I really like about storage is that a lot of these mom and pop owners, they've owned these facilities for 10, 20, 30 years. So they bought them when they were, or built them, for like, let's say average example, $50,000 to $100,000. And all of a sudden now it's worth $1 million or $2 million 30 years later. These mom and pop owners love seller financing, because you're telling them they can spread their capital gains risk over 20, 30 years. So you don't even have to go to a bank to get a loan. The other thing that we strategize now that we're very lendable, in the beginning we weren't lendable, but now that we are lendable, what we'll do is we'll ask sellers to do silent seconds. So we'll get a bank to put down, 75 to 80% of the acquisition. And then we'll get the seller to carry back another 15 to 20%, so that we're in a deal for like 0 to 5% down,
Crazy.
So now your cash on cash return is infinite, because you have no cash invested in the deal.
Crazy. Well, I would definitely suggest just even hearing it here, where it makes a ton of sense as Fernando's describing it. Like, for those of you that are interested in self-storage, you probably want to get with a mentor, or obviously check out Fernando and some stuff that he puts out and everything he has to offer before getting into one of these deals. Because even whether it's financing or underwriting and stuff like that, which you said, I'd be happy and would be honored to do another call with you on that. But just a lot of moving pieces, and it seems like it's in the details where you could really, make more of a spread, or thin out risk, whatever you're looking to do. There's a lot of variables in play there.
And what we've been doing a lot recently is, and I offer this to your guys and gals too, you got my email address, info@titanwealthgroup.com. You foreshadowed this. I'll give you my cell phone. It's 630-408-8090, 630-408-8090. That's my real cell phone. You can text me. Texting is preferred. And what I've been telling people is start driving for dollars. It's that easy to start. You don't want to spend any money. Drive around, and I can guarantee you on your daily commute, you drive past 2-3 self-storage facilities. You've never even noticed them. But now that you hear me talking about it, it's kind of like when you buy a new car, then you start noticing your car everywhere else as well. Stop into those facilities, say, hey, I work with a mentor. His name's Fernando. He's looking to buy some self-storage facilities. I'm looking to buy some self-storage facilities. Would you be interested in having a conversation? And then once you get that information, or just even their contact info, give me a call and I'll partner with you on the deal. I've done this so many times where investors heard me on a podcast. They find a deal. It's a viable deal. I get it under contract for them. We go wholesale together, and I give them half a fee. They don't have to do anything. And in the process, they get to learn the entire business, basically, while being in a very low risk position. So that's one of the ways that we buy a lot of deals now, is a lot of guys that hear the podcast that I'm on talking about this stuff. They just call me and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you walk me through it? And then I start underwriting the deal with them. And I say, hey, this is a great deal to wholesale. I'll buy it off of you. I will be your wholesale buyer. We don't even need to go try to wholesale to somebody else. But if you do still want to wholesale it, I have close to, I think, 1,500 to 2,000 self-storage buyers on my list now nationwide. And they're looking all over the place. Everybody's looking for self-storage right now. So, get in your car, stop in, talk to the manager. Half of the time when you walk into these smaller facilities, it's the owner sitting behind the desk, not a manager. And just say, hey, I'm interested in seeing if the owner is willing to sell this place, for a fair price. Are you the owner? Are you the manager? If you're the manager, would you be willing to connect me with the owner? I'd love to keep you on as the manager. So don't worry about your job. That's just it's a very easy, very, very just relaxed conversation. It's no pressure.
Mm-hmm. For sure. The reticular activating system will be firing. So when I put this podcast out, I'm definitely going to encourage you guys, because I know a ton of you guys are doing driving for dollars, to keep an eye out for self-storage units. Nando says you might drive by 2 or 3 units a day and maybe not even realize it, but now that your ears are perked up to it, And that's the same, what you're offering. I appreciate that, because that's the same way that you got started, is just pretty much just going to real estate and just being like, hey, I'll do whatever you want. Just, kind of teach me what, or why am I doing this? Like, kind of teach me. So that's exactly what Fernando is offering for you guys too, which I appreciate. And it's just wins all around, maximizing the efficiency of, helping as many people as possible. I forget the formula for money, but it's like, or creating revenue, but it's like the amount of value multiplied that you're able to, provide to people is essentially how much money you make. So this is a lot of value all around for everybody involved.
Right.
Cool, dude. Well, that was a very concise presentation. You have me convinced. I think that the 78% of fragmented market, I think that may go down and down just from the amount that you're going to get and other people getting into self-storage. I guess just to ask one thing, what are some potential cons of self-storage versus single family, multifamily? I think maybe we talked just maybe a little bit longer due diligence period, but I guess that's not even the case for multifamily though. Because multifamily probably has a similar enough due diligence and underwriting period. What potential cons?
Right.
Not to put you in the scolding hot seat here, but what kind of cons would there be to self-storage?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the very first things is that you have a lot more capital at risk, right? These self-storage owners, they're not going to be okay with you putting $100 down as earnest money on $1 million facility. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to cough up a little bit more cash. On average, on smaller deals, we'll put $1,000 up. On medium-sized deals, 5 to 10, and then on larger deals, anywhere between $15,000 to $20,000 earnest money. So that's, if you're just starting out, and that's like your entire marketing budget, maybe start with the smaller facilities, or maybe build up your cash reserves until you're at 40, 50K, and then you can start swallowing these. So that's one of the biggest risks, is there's a chance that like all real estate, your earnest money is at risk if you do not perform. Obviously in our contracts, we build in a lot of contingencies, just like in the wholesale world. But as long as both the seller and the buyer act appropriately, there's usually no issues. Another thing is kind of it looks like it was a trend that caught on for a little bit. It's starting to go away again though, is the Marie Kondo, right? The declutter your life type thing. Mm-hmm. And get rid of things you don't need. One of the reasons why self-storage is really great in the United States is that we like to buy a bunch of stuff and never get rid of it. We tend to buy big houses and then fill our house with as much as we can, and then all of a sudden now we got more stuff because there's holidays and stuff, and we have to push it into storage units. And there's a trend now to declutter your life. So for example, I'm a self-storage owner. I have probably 13 facilities now. Maybe 6 or 7 in the pipeline, some large deals. But I personally am pretty utilitarian, right? I don't have a lot of possessions myself, so I'm not a typical self-storage user. That being said, I have used self-storage in the past. When I was in college, I didn't want to haul my stuff home for 3 months. I just put it in a storage facility. When I came back to school, I'd get it out, put it to my new apartment, wherever I was. So that's another one of the concerns. I think another big concern is that, this was kind of like this not very sexy asset. Nobody really paid attention to it, especially the big dogs, right? The hedge funds, all those guys. And in the last 10 years, probably because people like me are talking about how great it is, all of a sudden the big money is starting to see how sexy it is. And what that's doing is causing cap rate compression. So for example, Blackstone just bought an entire self-storage company, one of the top 20 operators, called Simply Storage, at a 4% cap rate for like $1.3 billion. Damn. So now the big guys are looking at it too as a very viable investment vehicle, especially now with the pandemic, where office, retail, large multifamily is not doing so good, which is typically what those big guys used to invest in. Now they're looking at alternative investments like self-storage. And, throughout the entire pandemic, our holdings have been doing really great. We've been breaking through occupancy ceilings that we've had at certain facilities. Our delinquency rates are either staying the same or going down in some areas. Our revenues are up. So it's one of those things where, one of the counter arguments is that, oh, well, storage is not essential to live, right? You don't need storage. You need a house. But at the same time, I'd also say, okay, look at the options around it. You pay $80 for a storage facility, or you pay $3,000 for a mortgage a month. Very easy to go from a $3,000 a month mortgage to a $1,500 a month mortgage by downsizing, and then just getting $100 or $200 self-storage units to augment the space that you lost. So my counter argument to them is that this is why we do really good in recessions, right? Self-storage typically helps people that are in transition. They're changing jobs, they're moving apartments, they're moving, where they live, they're moving states. So it's one of those things where, I try to poke as many holes into it as I can, because I'm also very skeptical of everything. And I just want to make sure I'm not myself going down the wrong path, but then also leading other people down the wrong path. But I mean, like I told you, since August of 2018, I went from 0 square feet to getting close to about 500,000 square feet of self-storage now. So in 2 years,
awesome.
That's how much I doubled down. I sold all my multifamily, I sold all my single family, and I invested everything into self-storage.
That's awesome. I remember one of the times that we've caught up when you were doing that. We talked, and you said you were looking to liquidate all that and go all in, put all your chips into self-storage. I'm not sure if we mentioned that at the beginning of the episode, but he is literally practicing what he preaches. One thing just came to mind. I think he's out of Chicago as well. Do you know Jonathan Tuttle by any chance?
Jonathan Tuttle? I don't think so.
Me. I'll have to. I think, because I believe he's in Chicago. He's a pretty popular guy, but he focuses on mobile home parks. Oh. He's into mobile home park investing, and he has a similar thing where some of the hedge funds and Blackstone were investing a ton of money into mobile home parks, which is kind of like, I don't know. I like these play, and they make sense too from kind of like a general philosophy where I like to zig where other people are zagging. Like, not a ton of people, like not a lot of people that when they get into real estate investing are going to RIAs and, reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, their first thought is, let's get a, self-storage unit. So I do like that as just general philosophy as well. It's cool.
Yeah, I looked at mobile homes. They're pretty good. Again, but the one thing that I didn't like about mobile homes is, again, having to deal with people. So my thing is, like, how do I get the least amount of people I have to deal with on a monthly basis? So self-storage, you have a bunch of tenants, but those tenants aren't there every day, all day, right? They are typically there twice on average. They go there once to drop all their stuff out, and then hopefully 10 years later or longer, they come back to grab it out and move it out to another facility or another state, wherever it is. You don't ever really see them.
Mm-hmm. From a high level, it's just the most efficient 80-20 way, most possibly automated way of doing it when the people are out of the equation and stuff like that. If you guys aren't watching on video, me and Fernando both have big metaphorical 80-20 tattoos on the inside of our arms, if you guys can see them. But yeah, dude, it makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. That's awesome stuff. We'll have to get an underwriting call on the books for sure, man. But yeah, much appreciated. I hope we can catch up here. Maybe do a little Chicago trip, April, May range. That would be awesome. And get to hang out in person and kick some dirt up, have some fun.
Anytime, man. I got a bunch of Airbnbs I could put you up in.
Love it, man. Well, Fernando, any closing words here? I'm going to have all the info for Nando and reaching out to him and talking self-storage. I'm also going to ask you guys kindly to think of us when you're doing your driving for dollars, since I know a ton of you guys are. Anything that looks remotely close to a storage unit, snag a picture of it, see if you can run in, talk to an owner. Always be talking to people, maximize the amount of quality conversations you can have with sellers, investors, buyers every single day.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. This is great, and I look forward to talking with you guys again.
Yes, sir. Much appreciation and love your way. Have an amazing rest of the day, guys, and catch you on the next one.